Welcome to The Check-In, a podcast by Telos, where we explore the headlines from Israel, Palestine, and across the world, wading into the complexity of seemingly intractable conflict to discover the power of peacemaking to heal us, our community, and our world. This is your host, David Kadabaugh, checking in from Washington, D.C. Last month, a group of around 3,000 American pastors signed a statement encouraging the Trump administration to reject U.S. precedent by renaming the West Bank, part of the occupied Palestinian territories, as Judea and Samaria, the name those in the settler community use for the West Bank. But it went further than just nomenclature. These Christians fully endorsed Israeli annexation of the territory, a proposal that erases Palestinian identity and ownership of land that has been stewarded by these communities for generations. Then, just last week, the Senate confirmed the new U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas. Huckabee is a self-professed Christian Zionist who has been quoted as saying, "There is no such thing as a Palestinian, no such thing as a settlement, and no such thing as the occupation." He has endorsed referring to the West Bank as Judea and Samaria. Meanwhile, on the ground, Palestinian communities across the West Bank are facing some of the most severe violence seen in decades. Nearly 100 Palestinians in the West Bank have been killed by the Israeli military since the beginning of 2025. More than 40,000 have been displaced in the north from military campaigns targeting refugee communities. The community of Masafriyata is on the brink of extinction as repeated brutal attacks from nearby settlers and IDF units in the area excuse and reinforce the violence. And all of this, as the U.S. is poised to send tens of thousands of guns to the Israeli government and billions of dollars of military equipment as the Israeli government continues its campaign of ruin across Gaza. Wow, it's a lot to take in, folks. But this week, we want to hone in on what's specifically happening in the West Bank, what American Christian Zionism has to do with all of it, and how we can own our responsibility to be a part of enabling peace in the region. We have a great team with us today, Sarah, Rebecca, and Greg. They have a lot of important words for us, especially those of us who come from the Christian tradition. So settle in, enjoy the show, and let's get to work together. Thanks for joining the show, team. It's good to have you all here with us. Sarah, where are you checking in from?
Checking in from Vermont.
Rebecca, where are you checking in from?
Checking in from Bonnie, Scotland.
Amazing. Greg, where are you checking in from?
New York City.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for joining today, folks. We have a whole lot to discuss, and unfortunately, we're in a moment of profound frustration and pain for our friends in the West Bank. And for those of us who are watching, we're kind of in this moment of asking, what can we do? How do we pay attention? How do we make sense of it all? Especially for those of us who are paying attention from the U.S., who are part of Christian communities. It's Holy Week, and yet what's happening on the ground is shocking and disturbing. And it's important to talk about. So we're going to spend our time today talking about especially what's been going on in the West Bank and how Christian communities, Christian theology, Christian Zionism even is a part of it. So to get us started, Sarah, I would love for you to give us some updates from the ground. What's been going on in the West Bank? We've been hearing about it in the news. There have been updates that I mentioned earlier in the introduction around settlements and IDF activity in the north, and even new policies from our government about how to talk about this part of the world. Give us an update. What's been going on?
Yeah, so to start at kind of a higher level, I think it's really important to note that the scale of violence we're seeing being enacted on the West Bank is higher than what we've seen in previous years. And if the genocide that was happening in Gaza wasn't going on, this should have and would have, I think, provoked more outrage and more response. But one of the things that Gaza and what's been done to Gaza has done is kind of provided a cover for more extreme violence and action against West Bank Palestinians to happen. So mainstream news media hasn't been covering this as much as they might have otherwise, right? I'm not as aware of this. I think all of us probably are less aware of some of what's happening. So it is really important to focus not just right on the most extreme violence, but to understand that what happens in East Jerusalem, in Gaza, and the West Bank is all tied together as part of the same system. So to go into some of the specifics then, since January of 2025, the UN reports that over 100 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank. A lot of that happened around the villages in the north, especially Tulkarm, Jenin, where over 40,000 Palestinians have been displaced from refugee camps and over 60% of dwellings have been destroyed. What we're seeing up there now resembles what we saw in Gaza, right? Mass displacement, less death, thank goodness, but a same intent to reduce the ability for folks to return back to their homes. And for a lot of these Palestinians, they're refugees who've already been displaced from their ancestral villages and towns, who are waiting to be allowed to return and now are being displaced again. So they're some of the more vulnerable, right? Doubly marginalized, experiencing violence upon violence. At the same time, in a slightly different area, especially around the South Hebron Hills, settler violence has been increasing at an extreme rate. If you've had the privilege of seeing the film No Other Land, you probably saw what we reported and what other folks have reported on around Basel Adra, the film's director, being attacked by settlers and then arrested by the IDF. And that's just one case, but really exemplifies a pattern of violence where settlers who are illegal occupiers in the West Bank, right, their presence is illegal under international law, go in and attack Palestinians, attack their homes, their persons, their cars, right? I'm going to say it's a campaign of terrorizing local people. Oftentimes when the IDF comes in, they, rather than coming to the defense of Palestinians or stopping the violence from the settlers, at best stand by and do nothing. At worst, often end up arresting the victims of this violence, right? They exacerbate the situation. They are not there to quote unquote keep the peace. They're not there to promote rule of law. They are there simply to, I'm going to say, right, contribute to the intimidation. So that is increasing at an alarming rate, right? There's a lot more data that I won't go into here. If you're interested, you can read our most recent Telos Tuesday update on settlements. But the scale at which settlements are increasing and settler violence is increasing is unprecedented, right? In the past year, it has increased at a rate that we haven't seen before. And that's really concerning. I think it's also important to note before we move into some of the analysis of the role we play in all of this, is that settlements are illegal under international law, right? When a country occupies a territory, it's illegal for them to transfer their population into the occupied area. So all of the settlements, first and foremost, are illegal. But beyond that, they're inherently violent, right? We see time and time again that when settlements are present, there's more IDF presence, and that's the instigation for violence against Palestinians. One really tragic story, right, from this past week is that a Palestinian American teenager, Amar Rabe, was shot and killed. I didn't see that in major news headlines, right? The US government and administration has been silent on that, even as one of our own fellow citizens, who's a teenager, was killed in, senseless violence.
And this isn't the first time, too, that an American citizen has been killed in the West Bank by the IDF, right? I mean, also think of Shireen Abu Akleh, the Palestinian American journalist who was killed a number of years ago, and her family has advocated for years for accountability for her murder, and yet there has been no accountability. And the disparity between the way in which we pursue justice and protection for American citizens elsewhere around the world who are attacked, even Israeli American citizens, in comparison to Palestinian American citizens, it's striking and it's very concerning, right? The lack of accountability.
Yeah, that's an incredibly important point. And I think all of this to me, and I don't want to say more than I want to say here, but all of this really signifies a devaluation of Palestinian flourishing, a Palestinian right to life, to prosperity, to home. And as we know, right, we believe in mutual flourishing, a future of freedom, dignity, security, human rights for Israelis and Palestinians. The more that is eroded for Palestinians, the less possible that will be in the future for anyone in Israel, Palestine. And it's not our job today, right, to talk about how the two-state solution is viable or not viable, but settlement expansion and a lot of the direct violence we're seeing only, right, inevitably pushes us further from a just and peaceful future for anybody in the region, and are things that we absolutely need to speak out against in the bigger context of stopping the immediate violence in Gaza that's tied to this, but then also creating the conditions as third parties who care deeply about what happens for any kind of just and peaceful future. And I'll stop there to let us have more time for the rest of the conversation.
Well, it's such a helpful starting point for us, Sarah, because what you're naming, as I see it, are two things. One, you have this massive increase, even prior to October 7th, of Israeli settlers in the West Bank attacking their neighbors, attacking Palestinians on their own land, uprooting olive trees and attacking herds of animals and livestock, intimidating people to leave. And then you also have this increasing level of violence from the Israeli military. And all of this is together contributing to a kind of removal of indigenous communities from their own land, a kind of ethnic cleansing per se, even. And as you named, 40,000 people in the north being displaced. We have friends in Bethlehem who are scared to leave their home for fear of what they might encounter along the way. And so this moment is really extreme. And I appreciate you naming that. What we're not hearing about in the news is because of obviously the extreme devastation of Gaza. And yet, this is still important to name and to talk about. And it would be all over headlines otherwise. And so, one of the things I want to do is to help personalize this a little bit more too. I know a lot of folks who are listening have been with us to the region, have visited our friends at the Tent of Nations. And this is one, family who experiences all of these forces kind of all at once. And Rebecca, I know that you're on the UK support committee for the Tent of Nations. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about who this family is. They've been, they're a Palestinian Christian family. They own a farm. They've been facing severe threats for decades to their land and their livelihood. And yet they're responding in such a powerful way. Give us some background for those who may not know. Who are the Nassers and what are the challenges that they're facing?
Yeah, of course. The Nassars, as you mentioned, are a Palestinian Christian family from Bethlehem. Their family has owned a farm on the outskirts of Bethlehem for over 100 years, dating way back to the final days of the Ottoman Empire. Today, this farm is found just smack in the middle of what's known as a Gush Etzion settlement block. It's one of the earliest West Bank Israeli settlement projects, started almost immediately after 1967 war. The Gush Etzion settlements have grown to such an extent that now they're seen as suburbs of Jerusalem. And there's at least 5 settlements surrounding the farm, and I believe at least three, maybe more now, outposts. They keep popping up every day.
And these are illegal or unrecognized Israeli settlements in the West Bank.
Yes. And the family still holds firm to this motto: we refuse to be enemies. And this motto is so deeply meaningful, especially because the family has been waging a 30-year legal battle for basically the naming rights to their lands. The Israeli state and military courts keep wanting to declare their land as state land or as unused land, and these are terms that are often used to clear Palestinians from their lands in order to make way for either more Israeli settler outposts or to expand existing settlements. And since October 7th, the settlers in the Gush Etzion settler bloc, who have been historically not as violent as, say, those in the South Hebron Hills, but violent in different ways in terms of land seizure, they've been getting more and more brazen with their excursions onto the Nassar's family land. In the 4 years since I've been going to the Tent of Nations, I've watched the closest settlement, called Neve Daniel, grow from the top of its hilltop down into the valley and back up again, each time getting closer and closer to the very center of the Nassar's family land. Like, the construction is so constant and so quickly expanding that snakes and scorpions have even left the farm because of the noise and the drilling from the construction. And since October 7th, they've had settlers build roads cutting across their lands, even in defiance of Israeli court orders. And some of the settlers have now moved these large renovated shipping containers, which are basically like mini houses, right on to where the farm volunteers stay. So this is another way that they try to provoke a reaction from Palestinians and how they set up almost like a pioneer outpost to claim the land.
One of the things that's so powerful about the Nassar's response to all of this is that they found, in many ways, creative, nonviolent solutions, forms of resistance to combat this expropriation, this seizure, this erasure of the ownership of their land. They've been going through the courts. They've been trying to get legal recognition of their due and right ownership, and yet they've also been resisting in other ways too. And what you named about them doing this through this ethic of, we refuse to be enemies. We are going to resist and claim our own humanity, but not degrade your humanity at the same time. It's such a powerful witness. And I know for myself and many other folks who have traveled, who come from the Christian tradition, their work and their witness is so deeply inspiring. And yet at the same time, what we're seeing right now in this moment is that Christians in the US are refusing to bear witness to the injustices that they face, and in fact are championing or applauding some of these kinds of actions of the settler communities, of displacing Palestinians. So can you help us understand, how are they responding to all of that from, these reactions from the Christian community, whether it's support or whether it's betrayal?
Yeah, I mean, I think with all this really going on, it's really easy to see how families like the Nassars, like the Casillas in the other area of Bethlehem called Al Mahoror, are feeling really betrayed by their fellow Christians. As you said, so many are completely silent about the struggles of West Bank and Gazan Palestinian Christians. Personally, I was introduced to the farm by a Christian Zionist classmate in a little strange twist of fate, and I met other Christian Zionists who would come to the farm before October 7th, who they would shake their heads and be like, it's so awful what the Nassars are going through, and it's such a shame. But they just couldn't connect in their heads that this Christian Zionism was part of the problem driving these Palestinians from their homes. And I can speak for myself, but I think also for these families, it's been heart-wrenching to see that the same Bible that gives Palestinian Christians such hope and faith in justice and the solidarity of God with us is being used by by Christian Zionists to advocate for their erasure. And yeah, to say that, oh yes, it's too bad that this is what you're going through, but we got to make a way for, God's plan. So I think there's a deep, deep hurt and betrayal there, that they were seen as just people that need to get out of the way, so to speak.
Yeah, expendable. Greg, I want to draw you in here. You've been doing this work for a number of decades, engaging in Christian spaces, talking about these forces, these theologies that dehumanize Palestinians, that weaponize theology against vulnerable communities. We're recording this during Holy Week. It's an important and essential conversation, and I'd love for you to help us understand what's going on here. How we got to this point where American Christians are doubling down on a commitment to domination and erasure of Palestinian identity, on supporting violence and injustice, and the very land out of which, the Savior that Christians worship was brutalized by the violence of occupation. So help us understand what's going on. What's the danger of Christian Zionism for Palestinians in the West Bank and beyond, and what this deepening commitment to Christian Zionism within the halls of power in the U.S. portends for the next 4 years? Because we're, at the beginning of this administration, and we're already seeing a renewed and profound commitment to this ideology.
Wow, DCAT, there's a lot in that question. First, I think this is much bigger than this moment or this administration. Christian Zionism has shaped what we often call the Israeli-Palestinian conflict since the very beginning and before. Christian Zionism is a loose term for a set of perspectives, theologies, and policies that Christians use to support the modern nation state of Israel, and often very right-wing causes connected to the state of Israel, like settlement and whatnot. I think there's a lot to unpack here, but I think that historically it's important to understand that Christian Zionism actually predates Jewish expressions of Zionism, often by a couple hundred years. It's a modern heresy. And as Rebecca points out, there are Christians on the ground, and not just any Christians. I mean, obviously I'm self-interested. I'm not a religious person, as I think our listeners know, but I do come from a very devout Palestinian Christian family. who trace their roots back to the origins of Christianity, to Jesus and his disciples. The first Christians were Jewish converts, or pioneers of this new breakaway faith, if you will. And their ancestors, their descendants are still there in Bethlehem, where Jesus was born today. I think what's interesting here is that it's really easy to look at the horrors on the ground and feel that they're half a world away. But from the very beginning of this conflict, they've been written in capitals and in countries far away from the so-called Holy Land. And the key drivers of this conflict, while it's not a religious conflict, this is about land and power, but have often been people who've used their religion to organize. And that's what we've seen in the United States. We've seen this in the United States for many, many decades. I don't know what you want to get into sort of more specifically, but Christian Zionism has been a real significant cultural movement for a century, and it's had these moments of growth during Israel's founding, during the 67 war. It really didn't become politicized until around September 11th, when many Christian Zionists and others viewed sort of the world through this prism of this cosmic battle between good and evil. And we were, of course, good, and then Islam evil. And so casting everything in this forces of darkness versus forces of light, and Christian Zionism, which had been there, bubbling under the surface and quite prominent culturally, was seen as sort of portending to this final battle, this end times battle. And so it's terrible for Christians on the ground. It's ultimately terrible in most of its forms for Israelis and Jewish people. It's terrible for the world. It looks nothing like Jesus. I think, what's interesting, if you read the Bible and you read his teachings, I think anybody, and I encourage all our listeners to do this, because this is so actually fundamentally critical to understanding what's happening in our country and around the world right now. You read the teachings of Jesus, and you look at Matthew 5, the Beatitudes, and then you come back and you look at what Christians in America are preaching publicly, not all Christians, but many, and in the halls of power right now. These things are opposite. I think the great irony is that a lot of these folks are focused on this end time scenario, the apocalypse and antichrist. And I don't mean this in a theological sense, but they're very antichrist. They are antithetical to the actual teachings of Jesus. And the result on the ground today is horror and devastation for Palestinian Muslims, for Christians, ultimately for Israeli Jews too. But the irony is that, wow, the world's oldest Christian community that dates back to the time of Jesus is being wiped off the face of the planet. And the key drivers of this are people who call themselves Christian, but look nothing like what Jesus called them to do.
One of the things I often reflect on when I've been in Jerusalem, walking on the Mount of Olives, is this moment in which Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. He stops and he sees Jerusalem, and he sees all of the violence and the injustice that exists within the city. And he says this line, he weeps, for it does not know peace, right? And yet so many of us Christians visit this land and we rejoice at what we see, being unwilling to look beyond the surface, beneath the surface, to the injustice that exists. And that disconnect for me is the source of a whole lot of heartbreak, that we are unwilling to see what Jesus saw of the injustice and to let it break our hearts in the same way that it did for Jesus. And, we're recording this during Holy Week, and it'll come out a couple of days after Easter. But even the whole, response that Christ had to all these events, which was one of nonviolence, of refusing to play into this game of violence and occupation and empire, flies in the face of the way that we operate often in Christian spaces, of celebrating the spread of empire, of moving towards security and freedom through domination and injustice. It's such an indictment of where we are and the imagination we have of what the kingdom of God is, if I may say, as a person of faith myself. But Greg, you named something really interesting, in that Christian Zionism has been around for a very long time, but became politicized after 9/11, formalized into this lobby, had growing influence from a foreign policy standpoint, what's different about this current administration's commitments to Christian Zionism? It's been around for a long time. It's had access to power. Is this moment different in any way?
Yeah, I mean, this moment, folks who are strident Christian Zionists are in power, and those in power are very explicit that they're paying attention to them. It's really important to understand, for all the talks about like our democracy being over and it being oligarchy and, long ago, not just with President Trump, our leaders really, they care about being in power, and how they get in power is with votes and money. And, Trump was very explicit in his last administration. He did something quite controversial in the Middle East. He moved the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. We don't need to get into why that's so controversial. If you want, I wrote an article about this at the time. You can drop in the notes. But just let's say it was extremely controversial. And he said very explicitly, I did it for the evangelicals. He did it for votes. And he's been paid off in very explicit ways. Like 80% of white evangelicals have consistently voted for him because he's delivering. He's doing what they want him to do. And in return, they're putting him into power. Marco Rubio, Catholic, I don't know what his personal beliefs are, but like he's paying attention to voters in his district. He's Secretary of State now, but of course he was first senator from Florida. And now they've installed former Governor Mike Huckabee, who is an avowed Christian Zionist, as the new U.S. ambassador to Israel. Huckabee has said things like, there's no such thing as a Palestinian. Can you imagine that? There's no such thing as a Palestinian, and espouse all sorts of right-wing views. There's no such thing as Israeli settlements, whatnot. All of these things are just designed to say that Palestinians don't have the same rights as other human beings. It's insane. There's no good future for anyone in Israel-Palestine without a good reality for everyone there. And instead, so many Christian Zionists like Huckabee and former Vice President Mike Pence, they're so caught up in this idea of the modern secular nation state of Israel being, the instrument of God's will that will usher in the second coming of Jesus, in which all but 144,000 Jewish people, except for those 12,000 for each of the 12 tribes of Israel, will be slaughtered in this final battle. They don't see the humanity of Palestinian Christians. They don't see the humanity of Jewish people, of Israelis, of anyone. It's all about sort of like getting Jesus back and doing, by any means necessary, sanction a genocide, ethnic cleansing, apartheid. Say we love Jewish people, whatever. But what we really want is this other thing that is denigrating of human beings and the very teachings of the person they espouse as their savior. So this moment is quite different because these folks are in power. They know they're in power. They're doing everything they can to take advantage of this power, but they've been organized for some time. And I have to say one last thing here, DCAT, that's a little uncomfortable, is it's really easy to sort of blame everything on Trump and all of his cronies and whatnot. The fact of the matter is, yes, policies are worse now in no small measure under President Trump. But when we're talking Israel-Palestine, policies don't look that much different between the administrations. Even today, there may be a lot of pomp and circumstance, but there's been reporting coming out that the Israeli government didn't think they were going to be able to do what they did in Gaza for more than a few weeks. And now it's been almost 19 months. But they didn't get any pushback from the Biden administration. That was really significant. I mean, a lot of rhetorical pushback many, many months in, but that was it. And I went to the White House a number of times and the State Department and on the Hill trying to argue for a ceasefire early on. And it was very clear that there was little appetite there. So I need to mention that because I think it's really easy for us as human beings to just put the world into black and white, just as kind of Christian Zionists and other evangelical Christians did after 9/11, right? And to be like, oh yeah, Trump evil, and the Democrat. That's not what's happening here. There's a consistent broken policy that has never, for a second of any hour of any day viewed Palestinians as human beings, viewed them as equal human beings. And that's the way out of this. Sorry, like whatever your views are on Zionism, we're working towards a future in which Israelis and Palestinians know safety, dignity, freedom. And Democrats have never supported that as a party, ever, not once, despite their rhetoric. Their policies led quite explicitly to the genocide that we're seeing today.
It's such an important point, Greg. All of us hold responsibility, regardless of the communities that we come from, whether we identify as a Christian or not. As an American citizen, we hold a whole lot of responsibility for bringing us to this moment. And yet, alongside that, we have to believe that in there is opportunity to be a part of the solution. I think right now in this current administration, there's particular opportunities for those who identify as part of this community, as part of the Christian or even evangelical community, to say, hey, this is not what we're asking for. This is not what it looks like to live out our faith. This is not Christ-like, right? In the ways that it's being used to, Christ's message, Christ's life, the Bible, and the way that it's being used to justify all of this. There's such an opportunity there. And I'd love for us to talk about that, because it feels for so many of us like we've been talking and raising the alarm for so long, and we feel so powerless. So what can we do right now? Is there anything in response that we can say, ways that we can advocate? What's the opportunity to respond to these dangers of silencing and intimidation and this perpetuation of injustice that are all being wielded by this administration, but that have been ongoing for many decades, as you've been saying?
I mean, I have a couple quick thoughts here. One, just I mentioned I'm not particularly religious. I'm not a serious person of faith, despite coming from this background and this community of the world's oldest Christians. But I have to say something that's also frustrating for me in my work. There's a lot of frustrations right now, and in life is that, like, on sort of the left, the cultural left in America, there is such a disregard for anybody who has any faith. It's this real deep bias and even antipathy. And I get where that comes from, because look at what we're talking about, how faith is being weaponized to destroy the basic humanity of our fellow human beings and to drive genocide and war that ultimately makes Israelis and Jewish people less safe. This is driving anti-Semitism as well. And this is just terrible for everyone. But the thing to know, too, in history, it's that there's always been a counterfaith narrative. And if you spend time in the US South, if you spend time in South Africa, and yes, in Israel, Palestine, it's also people and community of faith that are the ones who do the things that are incredibly costly to transform the reality on the ground. And so I just need to say that before we get to the particulars, because you look at South Africa, it was the church who really, drove that global BDS movement out there. You look at the U.S. and the civil rights movement. It was Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and so many other pastors and faith leaders who really took this risk. And so I want to remind our listeners of that, who do come from a faith background and who don't, that faith is used to commit untold horrors, but it's also been used, and often the critical element, for unimaginable positive transformation. And so that's the opportunity this moment holds. So pay attention to the Palestinian Christians. Amplify these voices. They've been calling out for decades. Hey, we're here. Why don't you pay attention to the teachings that that you purport to believe in? Live them out. Listen to us. Be in community with us. Speak up. Speak up in this moment, not just to your politicians, but to your pastors. It's Easter, it's Holy Week, it's Friday, and it's Sunday coming, and there's an active genocide happening against the world's oldest Christians that's being supported by Christians. You have a duty to speak up right now, not tomorrow. And if you haven't before, your voice is more powerful than it's ever been. Get out there. Get your folks to speak up now and say not enough. And guess what? Last thing, if you don't think it can have influence, those folks who are speaking up are having influence. That's why Trump said, I did it for the evangelicals. What would it be? Imagine how different it could be if all of us spoke up, including the people who he's listening to and the votes he wants. And so he said, I did peace for the evangelicals. Sounds absurd, sounds crazy as I say that. But the reality is that our politicians, they want power. And the only way they get power is when we give it to them. So you got to organize. You got to speak up. We're trying all to do our part. It's going to feel that it's impossible until it's done. But this is the moment now to speak up. And again, if you haven't spoken up yet, your voice is so much more powerful than it's ever been, because people know what I think. They know what Sarah and Rebecca and DCAT thinks, but now it's time for them to know what you think. Your voice matters, and it matters right now.
What I want to add to that, right? I think there's a two-pronged approach to speaking up. One is to naming violence and helping make it visible. That's a key part of self-interrogation. Where are we part of the problem? Where have we wittingly or unwittingly contributed to injustice? But the other part of that might feel slightly easier if that feels like an overwhelming task, even if it's one we are all called to do, is to also speak up and cast the vision for the alternative that we want to see. Peacemaking isn't just about naming violence. It's also about inviting people into a different vision for the future on the other side of violence. And I think that both of those are essential, right? As we've done today, naming the problem, but then also as people start to self-interrogate, inviting them into a really compelling vision of a more just and peaceful future that they are a part of. Whether it's called mutual flourishing, collective liberation, peace, whatever the framework is that speaks to you in your community, standing steadfastly in that vision, even as people argue with you over the details or the violence, or you feel like maybe you don't know enough to argue about the facts. Staying committed to that vision for a different future and inviting folks into that as part of self-interrogation, I think is such an important part of this. It's really hard to sustain outrage. That's an emotion that's incredibly draining. But a deeper commitment to hope and to love and to a commitment to not just fellow Christians, but all Palestinians, all Jewish Israelis, true flourishing in the Holy Land, right? That type of deeper, compelling vision is easier to sustain through the hard times. And the only other thing I'd throw out there is a recommendation for a film called Till Kingdom Come. It's a film about Christian Zionism made by a Jewish Israeli filmmaker, and I think does a fantastic job laying out the complexities of communities that hold Christian Zionist beliefs. And I'll end my part with saying, I got this from a high school French teacher, but he always used to say, it's okay to be ignorant. It's not okay to remain ignorant. And so I think so much of this, right, to build on what Greg said around, if you haven't spoken out yet, it's not too late. Your voice still carries so much power and importance. Our communities don't always see the waters they swim in. So self-interrogating isn't about making people feel bad for not knowing the ways they've been complicit. It's helping them, once they see the ways they've been complicit, build constructively toward that better future. So that is my invitation, right? Speak out loudly against injustice, and in just as loud a voice, cast that vision for peace, justice, mutual flourishing on the other side of violence to invite people into building that type of future we want to see.
DCAT, I'd like to add one thing to Sarah's very, very helpful comments, and that's just for particularly our Christian listeners. I think it's important to name something really special that Christians have, and this is tradition that I, grew up in and not only am part of still, but that there's a story for moments like these, and we're living that story right now in Holy Week. We're recording this on Thursday. Tomorrow's Friday. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming, and it seems that these rebirths, these resurrections are impossible, but Christians have a story to believe that in fact it is possible. And right now, if I might be so bold, Christianity needs a resurrection. It needs to be reconnected to the fundamental teachings, not just the entirety of the Bible, but what Jesus said. Matthew 5, the Beatitudes. We're in this moment right now where Christianity is literally being used by empire to breathe horrible things into the world. It's Friday for Christianity. I wonder if Sunday could be coming. And I want to propose to our Christian listeners that there's an incredible responsibility here, even if you don't think that it's possible. But there's an incredible opportunity here. what would the world look like? What would Israel-Palestine look like if people actually were serious about living out the teachings of Jesus instead of being on Team Jesus? Seriously, imagine what our country would look like if that was the model of Christians. If there was something to look up right now, I think in many of the circles that I run in, like you said, Christian is a dirty word. And it's well earned as far as I'm concerned, because the majority of Christian leaders out there don't look anything like what Jesus called them to. And that hypocrisy is glaring. And it's so glaring right now. And so I just want to say to our folks who see themselves as true believers out there, I want to give you that other perspective that you do have the script within the Christian faith. It's there and it's here. That's what Holy Week and Easter is about. And so there is that real impetus, that cradle that could carry us into a different reality, which seems impossible, and that's larger than us. And so what Sarah's talking about, imagining and casting vision for a different future, taking these very practical steps and educating ourselves and those that we know and love, and then also going out there and risking, because it's not comfortable. Friday is really, really dark and uncomfortable. Those steps are things, it's all of our responsibility to take, whether we believe or not. But Christians have a unique advantage because they have the script there that says this is what it means to be a Christian. It's to believe that there is a Sunday, even when we can't see it.
That's such a powerful word, Greg. It's so helpful to hear from you as someone who's, as you said, has been connected to this community, grew up in this tradition, and now, largely spent a lot of your time from the outside looking in, giving us this perspective of how Christians are being received and perceived from the outside. It helps us self-interrogate, because what you're naming is so true, and that we've in so many ways failed to take up this mantle that we've been offered from Christ to be the people who embody and incarnate resurrection. I mean, it's Easter weekend, and what we acknowledge is that out of death comes something new, emerges opportunity for life and wholeness and repair. And yet we have been the ones who have been doing the crucifying. And what an irony that is, right? And yet there's such an opportunity here. And one of the ways that we embody and incarnate resurrection is through relationship, through getting to work and doing this work of justice and peacemaking and repair. And Rebecca, just to give you a shout out, one of the things I am so inspired by and respect you so much for is that you've built these relationships on the ground and you follow through on them. You commit to doing the work alongside your friends, whether it's the 10 of Nations or other peacemaking communities you're a part of. You are out there embodying resurrection. And I think that's an invitation for all of us, is to do that work. Don't let your experience in the Holy Land, whether it was 4 years ago or 10 years ago, stop in the place of your memory. Flesh it out in real life. Follow through with those relationships. Follow up with your friends and ask them how they're doing, and get to work in the ways that they're asking you to, and standing in solidarity. This moment is more dire than we can imagine, folks, for our friends in the region. And yet we are to be a people of resurrection for those who come from the Christian tradition. So I so appreciate this invitation. It's a challenging one, and it's one that we need. Before we wrap up, though, I do want to switch gears a little bit and invite Sarah to share a little bit about some bittersweet news she has for us. Sarah, would you share?
Yeah, so I've been in denial about this, but this is my last check-in. It's been a wonderful 5 years working at Telos, and it's time for me to move on. So I am parting ways in terms of official employment, but forever a supporter of Telos, our work, and now a staunch community member. I'll be moving to Germany.
Amazing. I know this has been a dream for you for some time. And can't say it's the wrong time to leave the country. Sarah, as we say, once you are in the Telos family, you are always a part of the Telos family. So you know that you are leaving with our just deep gratitude, respect, and friendship. And I know that everyone on the team is going to miss you dearly, your insight, your wisdom, your brilliance. We are so excited to see what comes next for you, and to see all the good work you're going to do in the world for justice and flourishing. And I'm wondering if you have any final parting words for our network, for our listeners, as you transition into this next stage?
Yeah, I'll try not to make it too long. Do you have another hour? No, but I think I'll start by saying, right, peacemaking is a way of life. It goes beyond any one job or occupation. And that's what I've learned from so much of our network and our partners on the ground in Israel, Palestine. So this is the end of my official employment with Telos, definitely not the end of my commitment to working for a more just and peaceful future and collective liberation for all of us. And as I've been reflecting on my time, I think the one piece I want to leave all of us with is that peacemaking isn't altruistic. It's not separate from ourselves as being bound up in a need for liberation. This isn't just about loving our neighbor and loving the other. I think it's also part of loving ourselves and seeing a more just and peaceful future that we want to be a part of too. And as I've been thinking about, right, the difference between love and altruism and how it convicts us personally, how it transforms communities, I keep coming back to what Cornel West described, right? That justice is what love looks like in public, and tenderness is love in private. And in a time of overwhelming need, both in Israel, Palestine, and in the US, I think recommitting and rerouting our activism, our engagement with one another in a picture of ourselves as part of that bigger community, and doing this work out of love for ourselves and for others, out of a belief that we can all be part of something bigger. That is what has sustained me. That is what I think sustains a lot of the folks that I look to and learn from. It's hard to sustain outrage without recommitting to the deeper love about why we are outraged. And yeah, that's one idea. The other piece that I just, again, soapbox last chance, wanted to share. One of the phrases that really has hit me this spring that I've thought about again and again came from Nora Erekat, who's a Palestinian intellectual. And it was that genocide is suicide. And I think watching what's unfolding in the US and globally and in Israel, Palestine right now, that has hit me time and again, right? When we allow ourselves to be complicit in genocide, it is suicide for our own selves and our own communities and cultures. Whether that's international law being eroded, whether that's Palestinians not being seen as equally fully human, whether that's belief in equal access to due process of law or who is valuable in society, our liberation as Americans, our flourishing is tied up to what happens in Israel, Palestine. And I'll pause there, right? There's a lot more to be said through Telos, through other places. But that is my invitation, right? Is to keep finding pockets of beloved community, to keep building pockets of beloved community that not just cast that vision for a better world to come, but also start getting to work today, where we are able to express love as tenderness in private, where we are able to collectively advocate for justice as love in public, and to build corners of the world we're striving to see, even as the work feels overwhelming. So I'll leave it there. This is not the last I'll engage with Telos or the Telos Network. But it's been a real privilege and pleasure to get to do what is very heavy emotional work, not just with the team, but with our whole network, who I think do model what a different way forward in a different world looks like.
Well, Sarah, you've modeled that way for us in so many different fashions in so many different times. And I know that your commitment to this work, your creativity on how to live it out has changed lives, has inspired so many of us to do the work that we're called to do and to be a part of instituting justice in public, right? Or love in public as justice. So thank you. It really means so much. And we are going to miss your lime green walls. Folks, you can't see what we're seeing, but Sarah often joins us in Vermont from this beautiful room with these bright lime green walls. And it's just become such a Sarah institution for us. And so we're going to miss you on the show and all of your insights and creativity, of course. And I'm excited to have you back as a guest sometime down the road. That'll be really fun. If folks wanted to stay in touch with what you're doing, is there a way they can do so? Or are you getting off the map? Is this some important space to, separate from the work and what we're doing here?
Yeah, great question. I am not a very public figure. So staying in touch right now, the best way would be to email my sarah.sturm@telosgroup.org email and let me know that you want to stay connected. I'm not willing to put my private email out there publicly, but I'm happy to stay connected with anyone who wants to keep the conversation going. I am planning on taking 2 months off for some rest and rejuvenation while continuing to advocate, right? The advocacy doesn't stop. But as I move to Germany, I'm looking to get plugged into local community, right? Doing activism work, doing community building work, that hopefully dovetails. So who knows, right? Part of for me being able to do this work from a place rooted in love is having some space for that tenderness for myself to come back in. So I don't know exactly what the future looks like, but if you would like to stay connected personally, emailing my current Telos email is the best way to do that.
Folks, we appreciate you listening. This is a hard conversation in an important moment, but know that you're not doing this work alone. We're here alongside you. We're here in community and solidarity with you. And this is how we move forward. I'm reminded, Sarah, from your remarks about Mother Teresa's quote that we belong to each other. If we have no peace, it's because we've forgotten that truth. And it's an important truth for a moment. We belong to each other. Folks, thanks for listening. As always, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It really helps. If you're enjoying the show, consider becoming a monthly donor. It's kind of, like our Patreon per se. We don't need to go through the extra nuisance of having a different platform. Just go ahead and give a donation online. You can find that link in our show notes. And read and share the principles and practices of peacemaking in our moment. They shape the way that we engage. And consider sharing this podcast too with folks in your network, especially those who come from the Christian tradition. These are important conversations to have, doing that work of self-interrogation of how we and our communities are a part of the problem and how we can also be a part of the solution. That responsibility, that opportunity is immense right now. Let's own it, folks. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.